We're going to sort of second question that we sort of want to go on. I'm going to open the poll up again, or the second poll. And again, Parksy, if you can help me out when the scores on the doors start coming through. So the question is around which phase do you currently working in or have most experience of coaching in? So again, just to give us a bit of a flavour of where people are at. So if you can fill out, and I'm guessing that might come through quite quick.
At the moment, foundation phase, 50-ish%. Youth development, 35-ish. Professional development, 10-ish.
Okay.
Open age, 15-ish.
All right, okay.
Fairly even split between mostly foundation and youth, but 30% above that.
And I guess, Claire, that's predominantly where you were using it with the girls. Is that fair? Because I know Man United have been using it with the 14s and 16s. That's where they've pitched it for the last 3 years, which I think was quite a brave move, but a little bit different.
Yeah, so we had a 10s, 11s, 12s, a 14s and a 16s programme. And from when and where they started, we used the older group more of a games format in terms of how to manage games. So how to manage environments. So if it was literally teaching them how to win games, that was literally, so when do we start? So that's that 16 age group. It was just to try to get them some concepts and mindset around that, because they come from a development background where they all equal game time, equal play. I mentioned before, they all rotated positions. Were actually, how do we get them to go and know where they play and who would play and win that game? So we'd do it in different contexts of a bio band, which is like a small, just basically just like line the players up and have the smallest against the tallest. And then what concepts that gave in terms of a physical output as well, so that we all know futsal can give you some, or you need that bit of physical robustness. But what does the physical player do? Still have to challenge themselves on a technical level, but also that younger, not necessarily younger, still in the band, but the smaller player, how do they get around that bigger player and what do they do about it? And try to make sure that they were challenging those various different ways as well. So it was kind of some utilizations, what we could do to do it. And to be honest, in a fun, I go back again, it was fun and enjoyable way. You know, we had an environment, we had a facility that could host that. So why didn't we use it? And like I said, it was a not necessarily a selfish way then, because now I've got 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old players who come through now, or who carried on with the game of playing. So through the pathways through colleges or universities or whichever pathway program they went into.
No, good. Hey, just coming on. I'm just thinking back, because I mean, I know you've been back in the clubs the last couple of weeks and building on the work you've been doing through all the COVID situation. What sort of things are you seeing, and what ages are you generally working with, and what you're seeing when you do go? Bear in mind, like Claire's working with elite girls, you're seeing it with elite footballers. What's some of the issues? What's some of the common threads?
Well, firstly, there's a lot going on, which is brilliant. Clubs really seeing the benefit of it, which is excellent. I think the majority is foundation phase, so 9s to 11s, 9s to 12s, but there certainly is, particularly the clubs that are doing it at that stage, they then realise that the players want to carry on doing it and the coaches see the benefits, they carry on. So there's certainly more growing at YDP, 12 to 16s, but predominantly foundation phase. And then it's interesting, I think a lot of what the coaches are doing, which is excellent, is what we've talked about tonight and what George was talking about, that they're starting with the movement of individuals. So they're looking at the individual within the game and they're looking at movement in order to receive the ball facing forward. And that comes as a team very simply to just spread out, particularly with 9s and 10s, just make sure we're using all the court. We've got width, we've got depth. And then from there, can we beat our opponent to try and get some space? I know George talked cat and mouse. Can we play cat and mouse with our opponent to try and receive it facing forward? And actually the best way we might be able to do that is by running off behind them. And if they don't follow us, well, we can get it in behind. So that's, I think, been the starting point. It's them being, again, what we've talked about. Once they're facing forward, a lot of the clubs use it for 1v1s and individual and staying on the ball type moves. They go through kind of different types of moves, particularly at the moment, the dragging and dropping. So that idea of whether you call it ball between your feet or shuffling, but that idea of shuffling with the ball, I know Grealish does it really well at the moment. And then being able to either drop inside to shoot because they're playing with inverted wingers, opposite feet on the opposite side. So shuffling down, cutting in to shoot, or having that move, which I know Iniesta was renowned for, that kind of shuffle where it goes quickly down the outside. So they're working with players to help them be able to go both ways in these 1v1 situations. And then from there, the next stage is probably the play and run forwards. And from there, you start to get your combinations that we've talked about, because if players are running forwards, they're usually getting a 1-2, or they're running forward for a parallel, which is passed down the line. So they're building up really quite nicely, but all from that individual starting point.
Yeah. I know for some time now, probably the last 5 or 6 years, Pete, with his foundation phase work, has been, stay on the ball, master the ball, master your body, master the ball, get on it. The revolving door that he's got about rolling and spinning off players. I think that seems to be really gathering traction. And I don't know, I've been in a couple of clubs last couple of weeks, and when you see, I'm seeing the players can really deal with it individually. I think the more times we put them in those situations to have a go, and the harder it is, the better the solutions that they keep coming up with. And I think that just that point about sometimes about just trying to get them to think forward, look forward, play forward, run forwards, just having that sort of mentality in them. And they only need a little bit of a push, and I think they start getting into those ideas really quickly.
Yeah, I think with our younger ones, I think we had to force them in a kind of a way to kind of like, you can only play forwards, for example. When they started to get into more youth phase, it was asking them when and how and why. Mm-hmm. And that was about then the coach. And I'll be honest, we probably got more confident probably answering the questions or helping them find it out as well. To be honest, I'll be honest on that in terms of that learning pathway where we came from. So I think, about creating environments, and I think there was a comment in there, and Pete's done really well answering all them on that. But I think Neil made a point about making mistakes, or do we call them learning opportunities? So it's really about how you create that environment for the players. They're gonna come up with problems that they're gonna, maybe not have the solutions for, or you help them to figure it out. It's just about as an environment for you to kind of, you've got to do that as a coach to allow them to kind of have a go, and then ask maybe why they did something, and then help them to reflect back and then action that. It's a really important thing, because the important thing is about actioning what they did against it. And that then helps them throughout all the levels to kind of deepen that surface of learning about what they did and how they did it, and then the collective approach as well.
Yeah. I think there's something here, though, about it's not always just the age of the player. I think sometimes we can get a bit carried away with foundation phase, youth development phase. I think, and I feel, sometimes it's like a futsal age as well. We're getting players that are coming into the game maybe at 14 and 15. So, there's a futsal age as well as a sort of chronological age. And I think you can sometimes see that. And it was that interesting. We had the UEFA B on Saturday and had 3 sort of 13 and 14-year-old teams in. And it was you could see that they'd played a significant amount of futsal. It looked quite different than what things looked like maybe 5 years ago. Just the way they moved, the way they dealt with the ball, really competent. And it looked like futsal, which was really good. I don't know what you're thinking, whether you're seeing that, and with somebody, because clearly you had players that were coming in at 16 when you were doing the program at Bristol City.
Yeah, I think your point about age and stage is really a really good one, because there are probably still people out there, and it is great that we are seeing, like you said, more kids playing futsal from 9, but there are still a lot of kids that pick it up at teenage years, or maybe pick it up at university like I did. And so that's where I think it challenges us as coaches. Do we teach them what a 19 or a 16-year-old should be if they'd have started at 9, or do you actually teach them what a 9-year-old would do? You start at the beginning, which is all the stuff we've just talked about, the receiving to face forward, the playing forward, running forward, and the combinations in pairs and the details behind that. And I think that's where you've got to start, even if they're teenagers, but they haven't played the game. You've got to start with the individual, and you've got to start with teaching them the 1-2, the parallel, the diagonal, so they can see those pictures. And then when they play the game, it starts to make sense, but it's hard to to pick up the game if you don't see those individual pictures, I think.
Yeah, and if you're just running in patterns, it can quite often break down because you're not recognising that. George was so heavy on that, wasn't he? About they were not playing off the cuff, but they were recognising the movements that were happening and making the best decision. And clearly, when you're European champions, you've got players that are making good decisions most of the time. It's really, really key.
Yeah. And there's clearly structure within it, isn't there? There's still the principles of width, depth, penetration, all those sorts of things. But there's a framework and the principles of pressure on the ball he talked about a lot and players working off that.
Yeah. And I think that's the key word is principles, which it is working within a framework and then choosing the best point at that time. Pete, I'm just going to come to you and sort of, your fingers must be on fire just seeing how much you're typing. Is there any questions that's coming through?
I think Ian's almost teed it up about small number combinations, and Mark Westerby, who we know is a massive fan and supporter of the growth of futsal. He talks about how he begins to introduce two-player connections in an unopposed way, so that almost builds the understanding. And then the next stage is to make it, more opposed and more game-like. It'd be interesting to hear your comments, and then we can throw it open to the chat to see about this balance between unopposed work and opposed work. And I know we've got a poll on that, haven't we? Yeah,
it's dead interesting. It's about do you use your unopposed work to paint the picture for people so they know what it's going to look like? But then clearly there's a point where being matched up or underloaded and trying to create that moment where you matched up is great. If you can get that overload for a fraction of a second and recognize that opportunity, that's where we're learning the skill and trying to execute that under pressure is the golden bullet, if you like. Do you want to, before we go to the poll, anything you want to chuck in?
I think it's going to be impacted by the amount of time you have with the players as well. So it depends on people on the call, whether they're with their players for an hour a week or they're with them for 3 lots of 2 hours. That's probably going to have an impact. And I think it's logical, for all the reasons you've just said, to have a combination. You need it all. Players need it all. But how you get that across, if you've only got 1 hour a week, can we be clever? We've seen with lockdown the power of home challenges and kids getting excited about doing stuff online. How can we get some of the unopposed, the individual stuff we've talked about, the moves to escape from pressure? Maybe there's ways we can do that through home challenges, even now we're out of lockdown, and then spend the first 5 or 10 minutes of our hourly session celebrating what people have done at home, and then get into the semi-opposed and the fully opposed within the majority of the session where you've got 10 or 12 kids together.
Claire, what was the philosophy within the girls' programme? Is that very much about opposed, directional, matched up sort of work? Is there a feeling around that linked to decision making?
I think the concept was to try to create as many. We're not going to say problems. We just wanted
to gain problems, isn't it? I think it is, and gain solutions.
Yeah, so it was just try to do it. And that's why I mentioned before about the bio band. So it was the physical ones. We don't want to forget those early developers because we still wanted them to be technically at a level of point. So, but even though they were successful at a younger age, of that age at that moment in time, what happens when the rest catch up? If we're not really honing in, backing and going back to that individuality again. But they needed to recognise where that sat in around. So that, they're unopposed. The bit where we went to just before we go to the pull bit was where the physical nature of it. So we had to we did that unopposed at the start. So we designed circuits to kind of show them. So the decel, axel work, and then all the variations in terms of what movements might be doing. So even just trying to replicate a wall pass, for example, or trying to replicate, a bounce pass, but in a high intensity nature.